Good morning, friends, and welcome to a bonus biblical perspective for February the 7th, 2022. It's one of those things I normally do on Saturdays, but events of the weekend have just told me that I can't wait until next Saturday to share some things with you that I think are very important. So you hang on, listen closely, and don't get off of this video until number 3, especially those of you who live in the United States of America. What took place that's so urgent that I can't wait until next Saturday to talk about it? Well, over the weekend, late Friday, the Biden administration decided to remove sanctions from the nation of Iran, yes, the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, to try to appease them into returning to the JCPOA, the failed nuclear agreement of 2015. While Iran just sits back and says, no, that's not enough, that's not enough, they didn't even respond well to this. We just allow them to keep building their nuclear program, keep building their nuclear reactors, keep doing their heavy water experiments, and trying to get ready for the ultimate war against their enemies. Their two main enemies are, number one, the nation of Israel, and number two, the great Satan, the United States of America. So what has happened over the weekend? Well, the Biden administration basically removed restrictions to allow civilian contractors to go in under the guise of these are safety concerns and the like to go back and help Iran with its nuclear program. In line with this, they removed the sanctions that Donald Trump put on them because of all the wickedness of this terrible nation, and have decided to just let them be free to pursue anything they want to. Oh, of course, they're only going to use this for civilian purposes. There isn't anybody in the world with their head screwed on correctly that believes that. And yet we are almost like Neville Chamberlain prior to World War II, just appeasing, hoping that somehow these terrorists will come to the table and offer us some good concession in return. If we're just nice enough, then they'll be nice. There is no indicator that that's going to happen. And yet we have just released, now hang on, an estimated $29 billion worth of funds that were frozen by the Trump administration that they couldn't use for their various nefarious purposes. Instead, now that money is free for them to attain whatever goals they might have in their weapons and terrorism program. Now keep in mind, these are the same folks that have not relented in terror attacks all over and around Israel, around Saudi Arabia, and even against U.S. bases recently. With no concessions from them whatsoever, we have just given them the key to the bank and said, go unlock the safe deposit box, and there you'll find enough money to literally start World War III if you like. What kind of people are we dealing with here? Anthony Blinken, what did you have in your coffee this morning that you are so clueless that you signed this agreement? It makes no sense at all. Meanwhile, we go back to the negotiating tables in Vienna, hoping that somehow, some way, this will encourage the Iranians to make some kind of peace deal with us, while they're just biding their time, enjoying watching the stupid American diplomats rattle on about the need for peace this and peace that, when they know that they have a greater objective in mind and they're marching towards it with all of their resources. You know, that money is not going to go build schools and parks in Iran. Instead, it'll be used, among other things, as terrorist funding to destroy schools and parks and innocent children all over Israel. Well, as we get to this particular event in history, one that took place late on a Friday, so it didn't get in a major news cycle. Many of you may not even know that it happened. I want to encourage you to chase down some of those folks. Eric Stakelback is one, Amir Safari, some of these other guys that are covering what's going on in the Middle East, and check out some of the details. It is astounding that the United States of America is going to be a partner with Iran in helping them achieve the goals of being able to attack and destroy the nation of Israel. What does this mean? I want to give you 3 things. Listen closely. What this means for the world and for the United States is, number one, Iran will continue to sponsor terror. With this new influx of cash, they'll be able to give Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, Hamas, all these folks, including their proxy war armies, the ability to attack U.S. bases and keep up their attacks on Israeli shipping. This is going to just get worse, my friends. It won't get better. Number two, second thing that's going to happen is that the war predicted by the prophet Ezekiel in chapters 38 and 39 of his book is closer than ever. Some are telling us that Iran is now just months away from being able to mount a nuclear warhead on one of those several delivery systems they've developed in the last few years, the ones they've been practicing with out by the Caspian Sea, the ones that they know they can use either against Israel or even the United States. They'll be able to mount one of those nuclear weapons and fire it. What will they do with it? That's a good question. But one thing for certain we know is Israel has said they are not going to allow this to happen. They can't let Iran get a nuclear warhead. If they do, then all Iran has to do is set off one of these in the right place. Now, for those of you who might live in New Jersey, let me ask you a question. One multi-megaton nuclear weapon set off in your state would do what? It will basically wipe you out. You know, you set off in just the right place, you could basically eliminate most meaningful life in the state of New Jersey, couldn't you? Guess what? Israel is a country about the size of New Jersey. It's not that big. Now, the question is only left as to how Iran will do this. Will they try to drop a nuclear weapon into the north of Israel, for example, that would then not only kill many, many Israelis, but also a large number of Palestinians, some of their own terror proxies in the process? Or will they set that nuclear weapon off above the country and let it do its work as an EMP? And that EMP blast, of course, would take out most of the electronic communications, fry all the computers, all the chips. It would make it to where an outside army could basically walk into Israel with, they would have opposition, but just not the kind of opposition that could be mounted if all their electronic systems and defense systems were available. Which of those will they choose? Well, you know, if they've got just one nuclear warhead, they can pick one of those. So Israel can't afford to allow Iran, who has said that they want to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, they can't afford to let Iran become a nuclear power. They will, therefore, intervene and make the first strike. And Iran knows it's a win-win situation. Because if Israel dares to make a first strike to stop their nuclear bomb from being launched, then they will be able to say to the world, look, we've been attacked by these terrible Jews from Israel. Let's all join together now and wipe them off the face of the earth, because look, they are the aggressors. You see, it's backed Israel into a corner that pretty much sets up what Ezekiel prophesied so many hundreds and thousands of years ago that would happen in the last days. You say, how do you know that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is about the last days? Go read the passage, because God tells Ezekiel this will happen in the last days. It wasn't something that was going to happen close to Ezekiel's time. And so as we read that, now we understand this war that Ezekiel prophesied may be at our doorsteps. And we in the United States of America have just helped make it happen. Well, then finally, listen to this one. Number 3, I can guarantee you that now 2022 and moving forward is going to be a bad year, maybe a bad future for the United States of America. Why do I say that? Because whenever we do something that harms the people of Israel, God responds. A dear friend in the Asheville, North Carolina area that actually wrote a book about this, going back and chronicling every time that as a government, the United States, the very country that was assigned the duty of helping Israel to come back in fulfillment of prophecy right after World War II. The nation that was right there without the signature of leaders of the United States of America in 1948, Israel could not have happened. We were assigned that as a place in history to be their defender and to help bring back the nation of Israel from the dust. And yet, here we are now, supporting the enemies of Israel to the point that they might try to destroy her. Now, we know that ultimately is not going to take place. God's not going to let it take place. But every time we've done something that harms the people of Israel, God responds. And he only responds back toward our nation with things like natural disasters or political blindness that allows us to walk into walls and make stupid decisions because our leaders have been taken away the ability to reason and have no more wisdom. And all that a part of God's plan, because he says, I just can't let you prosper if you harm my people Israel. Don't you know that I've brought them back to be safely in their land when Jesus returns? No, that's not what's going to happen, though, if it's up to some of the people right now that are running our own country. So how does God respond? He has to respond by harming us as well. And so this is going to be a bad year, my friends. You see, in the United States, I'm sorry to report we are already an apostate state. Yes, there are many of us who cry out that we're to turn back to God, follow him, obey his laws, follow Jesus, repent, and revival will come. But that word is falling on deaf ears for most of the leaders of our country right now, who are leading us off into the kind of rebellion against every one of God's laws that God is going to have to respond and judge us as a nation. There's no escaping that, my friend. So are things going to get better in the United States? Well, perhaps for certain communities that have given themselves over to the gospel and to Jesus, there's always a chance of God blessing certain areas, certain places, certain communities, maybe even certain states that reject what's going on, coming out of Washington and some of these other places. Yeah, there's always that possibility. But as a whole, the United States of America is on a downward spiral, one that is not going to be abated anytime soon. Friends, for those of us who live in the United States of America, we're experiencing some of what the people in Israel and Judah experienced when their king started leading them off away from God. Yes, good people can be in a nation that's under the hand of God's judgment. And that's what seems to be what we're going to be facing here in the near future. It's not a pretty picture, my friends, but that picture had one more big, gigantic swath painted across it over this past weekend when our own country decided it's better to let Iran have all the money they need for terrorism and nuclear weapons rather than to stand in their way. God help us all. Well, thanks for joining me for these few minutes. Keep your eyes on Israel in these last days, and it'll show you what's going on in the rest of the world, and it'll show you what God's plan is all about. In the meantime, keep looking up, because, friends, like the old song that came out in 1970 that said, "Redemption draweth nigh." Friends, lift up your heads, looking up. Jesus is coming soon. God bless you.